Thank you.
No problem.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to present a first, I guess, workshop on universal design and what I hope will be a series which will lead to maybe, some type of repository resource on using strategies based on universal design and how we teach and structure courses here at Kalamazoo Valley Community College, KVCC. So I know most of us know one another. Haley and I are still fairly new. And so just for good practice, let's start off this today's session with an introduction of one another. And what we'll do is I'll start and I'll choose somebody, and then that person will choose somebody, and so forth and so on. So I am David Swan, and I am right now the lone instructional designer with the Faculty Success Center. I will choose, let's see, Haley to introduce herself.
So it might be a little bit quiet because I'm just going to talk through Dave's mic. My name's Haley. I'm in the Faculty Success Center. I am a new Molly and David. Still learning things, but here to help with Canvas or technology or really whatever you need. And go ahead, Meredith, you're under me on my screen.
I'm Meredith, and I am psychology faculty. Oh, Veronica, you're the next box.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I'm geology. Nicole.
I'm Nicole Newman. I teach math. I'm going to call in Amy.
I'm Amy Longcore. I'm part-time math here at KVCC. And let's see, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle McGowan. I work in the Office for Student Access. I support our students with disabilities here at KVCC and also the faculty here at KVCC. David.
Hello, my name is David Cobb. I work in the Faculty Success Center. You all know who I am.
And I'm last, so I'm Molly Pfaff, and I also work in the Faculty Success Center.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. What I want to do is proceed here, and I want to show you the agenda I had planned. But as I will be up front right now, a couple things about this workshop. Number one, I realized only yesterday, gosh, this is really ambitious for an hour. And the last thing I want to do is power through speedily on, content and learning ideas that deserve a bit more thought. So I'm highly doubtful that we're going to touch upon every single thing in here, but I will show you, the menu, if you will, of the agenda, just so you have an idea of what I intended. And of course, I will be sharing this PowerPoint with all of you as well, and I will make it publicly available to all KVCC faculty and staff. So first of all, in part one of this workshop, I have a UDL primer. That is, just a little bit of background on universal design for learning based on the survey I sent out. There was various levels of understanding of what universal design for learning is. I mean, one member we have here is on the universal design committee, and others are like, I really don't know. So we'll go through that fairly efficiently. And then we're going to dive into the major components of the major category of universal design for learning, and that is providing multiple means of engagement. Okay. Part three is sustaining effort and persistence. So providing options for that. And then part 4, self-regulation. Now I had this idea that we could discuss practical application, but I honestly think that as we have our discussions, based on what we're learning, we'll probably be able to tease that out in our discussions. So I don't think we're going to get to a part 5. Now, based on the responses I got in the survey, there seems to be more interest out of everything. I mean, there's interest in everything that I wanted us to look at, but this idea of having options for helping students with self-regulation, in their learning, on the online course or even in the classroom, seemed to be the thing that most people were most interested in. And that makes sense because since the pandemic, it's put everybody in a different place, especially, emotionally and with anxiety and just within the dramatic changes in situations that students are dealing with. So what we're going to do with the agenda is we'll start with the primer, and then we're going to skip right down to part 4 and kind of unpack all of that. And then, after we've done that, we've had our discussion, we'll see where we are time-wise. Because I just don't want to rush this. And I think that even self-regulation in itself deserves a lot of thought, considering the times that we have been living in. Any questions right now about the road we're taking here? Great. Please feel free, because I know a lot of people just really feel comfortable with popping their thoughts and questions in chat. It's going to be hard for me to monitor the chat, so I'm depending on my wing people, namely Haley and Molly, to maybe help me out with that, because I won't notice. All right, so let's start off with just a brief UDL primer. I gotta click on this. There we go. And we're not going to really go into the history of it. That's, if you're interested in the history of a timeline of the, where the universal design for learning stuff came from, then you can do that if you want. I'm going to skip that. And I do want to briefly go over, though, the brain science behind UDL, just briefly, and then take a look at the guidelines overall, so you have an idea of the breadth of this and what it does. So I'm going to skip down to I'm going to move past this, and we're going to talk about the brain science. And the brain is complex, and Meredith, you can take it from here. No? Okay. So the brain is extraordinarily complex, and so UDL is kind of based on 3 major regions of the brain, which is an oversimplification, but it really kind of helps all of us who are not neuroscientists or neuropsychologists or psychiatrists to kind of break it down into more easily understandable chunks. So we have the affective networks, which is this part of the brain here. And that's really, kind of like it's buried at the center of the brain. I know we can see it. Consider this kind of like a cross section of the brain. That's its location, okay? The recognition networks are kind of located in the back. And the strategic networks, that's the frontal lobe. And that's why those of us who've taught teenagers before refer to teenagers as having squishy frontal lobes, because some of the functions that this controls is about judgment and so forth. So what does this really all mean? Well, to oversimplify, but help us kind of have some level of accessibility of what these different networks kind of do, is with the affective networks, it allows us to monitor the internal and external environments and to set priorities. It deals with motivation and also, engaging in learning and learning behavior. Okay, so that's an oversimplification. None of these networks are hermetically sealed from one another. Obviously, they are basically all one unit. We're humans, we need to categorize. So then the recognition networks, they sense and they perceive information that's in the environment, the stimuli, and it transforms that into usable knowledge, depending on how well we are aware of how we perceive things. And then also, finally, the strategic networks. That's where a lot of the planning and the organizing and the initiating purposeful actions in the environment. So that's when I say squishy frontal lobes for teenagers, though I think a lot of adults have squishy frontal lobes. That's where that comes from. And so for universal design learning, they have 3 different categories where they have their guidelines and checkpoints within their guidelines that are based on these 3 parts of the brain. So it's thinking of the student holistically and kind of thinking about, the science behind the brain. I mean, all learning happens there, right? All the perceptions and stimuli that come in and how it's perceived, whether it's online on a course or in the classroom, a hybrid or whatever, it's going to enter through our senses, and it's going to be interpreted and processed in the brain in these parts. So there's an alignment or an attempted alignment of UDL guidelines being informed by these factors. So that's what this handy dandy graphic shows. So we're talking about brain science, and also we didn't talk about the history behind universal design for learning, but if you explore that, you'll see that earlier there was an architect, I forget his name, but he comes up with this idea of design thinking, which is and it applies in any type of design. It could be software design, it could be architecture. You could think of things such as ramps for people who have difficulty walking or are on a wheeled mode of transportation, transporting themselves. Design thinking informs that, which eventually, a lot of these ideas are borrowed by the ADA. Okay. So when we apply UDL guidelines in our course structures, in our instructional practices, the side benefit is that in many ways we're going to be complying with ADA, which is a big deal for us in education. All right, so here is here's what you would see if you went to there's an organization called CAST. I don't remember what the acronym means, but they're kind of the portal of accessing universal design for learning and the guidelines. And if you click on this, or if you go to the guideline, I'll provide access to that. You'll get access to this. You can look at all these checkpoints. So we're going to be focusing on engagement today, and really self-regulation with these as a bonus. All right, but you'll notice that each of these align with the brain science behind all of this. And so for engagement, they got 3 major categories here: provide options for recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and then providing options for self-regulation. You notice the word options. So a big part of universal design for learning is that we're providing students with options, because our students are not all the same. They all have different needs or different preferences. They all have different situations, different abilities. And so it seems kind of overwhelming to try to address all of those. Universal design for learning kind of tries to present us with ideas and then the offshoot of strategies to address this. Now, keep in mind as we go through this, Rome was not built in a day, and your course was not built in a day. And applying any type of guideline system, that doesn't happen overnight either. So as we look at some of these checkpoints, and that's what these bullet points here are, checkpoints with this in system, It doesn't mean that we're going to try to apply all of these things at one time. You can only do it one thing at a time. Okay. So that's kind of an overview of universal design for learning. Our area of focus starts right here in earnest. Okay. So again, affective networks, recognition networks, strategic networks. There is an alignment, like I said, and this kind of slide kind of illustrates that. Okay. And this is just a reiteration. I'm going to kind of zip through this slide unless anybody wants to take a moment to look at this, but this just demonstrates the alignment between the brain science and the category and the subcategories here of each major part of the UDL guidelines. All right. And that's where we're going. Okay, so these are the three, when it comes to multiple means of engagement, we have three different areas that we're looking at, and we're going to start with the last one here. I mean, one's not codependent on another. It doesn't really matter where we start here. There's no prerequisite in order to understand these. So we're going to start with part 4. So provide options for self-regulation. So we're thinking in terms of what types of activities or systems can we put into our courses, whether they're in the classroom, whether they're online, that will help students with their own self-regulation, which the term self-regulation implies a lot of different things. All right, so I'm going to skip there, click on that, and we'll go right there. So we're talking about providing options for self-regulation. And another thing I want to point out about this particular workshop and this particular presentation is that this stuff, unless I'm saying it or if I'm reading it and you see it on the screen, it's largely directly from the guidelines. It's not my thinking. I just want to be clear with you on that. So all I've done is taken it and distilled it for brevity so that we can get the highlights, just so you know. So with part 4 in this presentation, provide options for self-regulation. Let's dig into that and try to think about what that means for us as professors and instructors. So we have several parts here. So under this, we want to promote expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. Now, let me go over here for a moment because I want to get myself set up here. I want to make sure I can, okay, I want that to be thicker. Just give me a moment. There we go. That. Okay, great. And I want it to be, that's good enough. I'm going to clear that. Okay, so under this idea of providing options for self-regulation, in other words, giving our students or your students different options or moments or activities for self-regulation, we're going to look at how we can promote expectations and beliefs. So there's expectations, which is outside of the student. Here's your expectations. But then beliefs are intrinsic, right? They're within themselves. And so how can we promote beliefs within our students that optimize their own motivation, right? Because we can't be entertainers all the time, even though some professors are naturally gifted in public speaking and they're in that way, or they have a topic that most of their students are very intrinsically motivated because they're interested in it. We still want to think in terms of providing our students a set of expectations, but also help promote beliefs that help them with their motivation. And motivation is part of that self-regulation. How do you keep yourself motivated as a student? The other part of this is, okay, get out of that, Dave, is to facilitate personal coping skills and strategies. So what kind of options can we provide them where we have structures that help facilitate, or activities that help facilitate students and their coping skills and strategies? Okay. And then finally, how can we provide them options where they can develop their own ability to self-assess and self-reflect on, so we're talking metacognition here, pretty much, is they're thinking about their thinking, but they're also thinking about their own, what motivates me? Why am I not motivated here? And kind of put that responsibility in their hands, especially at this level of education. All right, so moving on. I'm going to go. I'm still learning how to use the annotation functions in Zoom. I'm not that fluent in it yet. So, give me small moments of being able to do this. Just draw. Okay. And I'm going to clear all of that. Eventually, I'll get very good at this. Okay. Back to this. Okay. This is making sense. All right. So when it comes to promoting expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation, one thing we want to keep in mind is that learners need to be able to set personal goals that can be realistically reached, as well as fostering positive beliefs that their goals can be met. And I kind of want to just stop for a moment for all of us to, give ourselves a chance to kind of think about that. And, so learners need to be able to set personal goals. And so that's kind of one thing that's very important here. So the idea that they have personal goals, oh, that's not working. Draw. There we are, I'm on draw now. So we want to think in terms of setting personal goals. And the word realistically sticks out. They have to be realistically reached. And then, another key term here is fostering positive beliefs. So as instructors, we want to think about that. How do we help our students foster positive beliefs in their own capacity to learn, but more importantly, to motivate themselves and stay on task? Learners also need to be able to deal with frustration, because the learning process is full of frustration. Well, a lot of that frustration could be self-produced. We put too much pressure on ourselves. Students put too much pressure on themselves. And so what can they do to avoid anxiety when they are in the process of meeting their goals? So we want to be able to provide multiple options and provide that to learners so they can stay motivated. And so we do play a role in that, but we want to provide them and support them in doing that. Okay. All right. So here we go. So moving on. Here are the specific things you want to think in terms of. And of course, we can expand on these things. So providing prompts, reminders, guides, even rubrics and checklists that focus on these areas. First, increasing the length of an on-task orientation in the face of distractions, which when I read that at first, I'm like, what are you talking about, folks at UDL? So we're basically giving them time where they're provided an opportunity to really think, how am I going to stay on task when I get distracted? How do I come back to my learning when I get distracted? All right. So the conscientious, you're providing them opportunities to think about that. Additionally, elevating or increasing the frequency of self-reflection and self-reinforcements. So let's kind of unpack this one here a little bit. So when we want to think about in terms of increasing opportunities for students to have some level of self-reflection or self-reinforcements, this idea of self-reflection, I will start this conversation because I would like people to contribute to some type of conversation based on this. So in my history classes, for my students, typically the class would start off with a self-reflection, an opportunity for you not only to reflect on what you learned the day before, but also, as a self-check. How are you feeling today? Where are you at emotionally? Okay, emotionally, are you in a good place to learn, or is it going to be a challenge? And so I would do anonymous surveys through a platform I like called Padlet. And that way I could get a snapshot picture of where everybody was in the class. But I know I got some people that, they're in a low place right now. And it's good to know that. And it also gives their peers anonymously an understanding that there are people who are struggling in this, on this big given day. So I'm curious if there's any level of awareness that any of you have, or if there are any practices that you can think of that you implement or would like to implement that kind of align with this idea of giving students an opportunity to self-reflect on, where they are in their learning on any given day, or it could be in a course. Do you provide opportunities for students to explicitly kind of touch base with themselves and with one another on their learning? I'll give you a moment to think about that. You can pop it in the chat, or you can just chime in. And by the way, silence is the most difficult part for teachers sometimes, but it's very important to give space for thinking and processing.
Ollie said in the chat, new advanced Zoom polls let you do a rating system.
Yeah, and I had heard, and I know of this. In fact, Haley mentioned it this morning, that there are new advanced polls that let you do a rating system like this. And I think this is something that I would like to park into a UDL strategy repository where we could show instructors, okay, here's one way you could use a Zoom poll to check in with students and have them check in with you and one another. So that's a great idea. Oh, here's another one. All right, Nicole. So she regularly gives students an opportunity to let her know how they are doing overall. She also gives them a heads up in their finance usage that I realize not everyone is in a good enough place to handle a conversation about finances. Wow, that's amazing, Nicole. So I offer options for that. I'm going to steal that. That Nicole, that's great, because this is a great example of an instructor thinking of students situational or even experiences, and how finance might be a triggering thing. I mean, if you've gone through a financial trauma in your life, maybe as a child or as an adult, where you got crushed by medical debt or whatever, and you had to file for bankruptcy, understanding that that's a possibility that a student might not even want to reveal because we have so many stigmas around that. That's really good. That's a great example. So thank you so much for sharing that. Veronica, She uses notebooks and face-to-face and on discussion boards. I want students to ask questions and make connections with the material. I love that. I'm a big giant inquiry person, and my hope is that someday I can start getting faculty together and start thinking in terms of inquiry-based learning, which I know a lot of you do just by default. The discussion boards are a great way to for students to help one another with this material. And that's so important that students have an opportunity to support one another in this. In class, I will have activities for students to think about how the material impacts them. And here you are, here what Veronica's doing is they're giving them so many opportunities to make personal connections with the instruction, the content, and the discipline. Which, you know, in geology, if you're a geek like me and Veronica, then we're all about it and we can make those connections, but not for everybody. And so to give those students those spaces to do that, that can really enhance motivation. And I think this is also Veronica. Before any meeting or conversation with a student, I ask how they are doing in general with class material or otherwise. So yes, very good. And then I see Nicole is tagging off Veronica. I always try to start from a, are you okay when problems crop up? I know, and I don't know if it's like this at the higher education level, but there are like different, one thing that a lot of K-12, you know, high school educators like to do is they have, you know, are you red, blue, or green? And blue is you're in a place of challenge where you're just feeling low and unmotivated. Green is you're right in the perfect spot. You're ready to go. And then red would be, and I think there's a yellow one there too, but red would be, I am like very anxious. And so this is another easy way for students to, you know, you can check in with, have them, give them that space at the beginning of a course or so forth, or a class to check in with you and with themselves. So anytime you have them do this, they're also automatically by default checking in with themselves, so that you're optimizing their ability to self-regulate. Meredith, she asked her students in her online classes to relate the material to themselves on a weekly basis. Awesome. Gives them an open-ended chance to reflect on the content and to relate it to themselves. This strengthens their memory of the content. Yes, it does. And I am not a psychologist, nor am I a psychiatrist, but I didn't play one on TV, but the high school thought I could teach it. And what I found was in the realm of psychology that the students really appreciated opportunities to think about their own selves with respect what they were learning in psychology.
Yeah, I can explain that a little bit more because the students
Great.
really seem to love this. The assignment, I call it a writing prompt, and it's low points. And essentially, if they complete it, they get full credit. So it's a nice low point activity for them to do. And it allows me, because I only use it for my fully online classes. So it allows me to respond to them and have some interaction with them. And it allows them to be honest because I'm the only person who's reading it. And it allows them to choose a topic that we have covered from the week and talk more about it. So they can pick whatever sounds good to them. And when they relate it to themselves, it strengthens their memory. And so I've had a number of students say, I really liked doing this, even though it's kind of busy work. I don't think they feel like it's that way, at least the students who are really engaged with the material.
And Meredith, what you just described there is on so many levels, universal design learning principles and so forth. I mean, that is a perfect example of something that hits so many points. You're providing students with choice. Like, which prompt do I want to answer? That's a choice. You're also motivating them by, now they're first of all, they can't be wrong. Because they're open-ended questions. You're inviting them to buy in and invest in and relate the topic to themselves. But also, there's another piece of this, and that is that you're building relationships with them. So at some point in engagement and all the other ones, we'll end up talking about creating a safe environment, an environment where they feel safer to open up. And the instructor student relationship is essential to that piece. You can't have it without that. So, I think it feels to them like busy work unless the instructor, their teacher, is actually giving them feedback or replying to them. Then it's like, okay, no, this person's invested in me. I feel like I can reveal myself and be a bit vulnerable. And this is a good place to be. And that in itself is going to, this idea of elevating the frequency of check-ins like this, it's going to motivate them. And it doesn't matter what discipline you have, math, whatever. When you provide students that opportunity to make a connection with you and you're connecting with them, that's going to motivate them. Even if, like in my case, I had students that hated history, and no matter what I said or did, they didn't see the point. But the fact that they had a teacher who invested in them and cared about where they were was enough, where they engaged at least a minimal level.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I don't always, we get busy and sometimes
Yeah.
you can't always respond to every single student. And sometimes I had to kind of quickly skim through their responses, but especially in the very beginning of the semester, I try to make sure I read everything and respond to everyone. And then it becomes a bit more sporadic.
Yeah, and I think that's important though. You start off strong like that. And then what you do is you try to keep in mind, okay, who have I not responded to in a while? So you pepper that in, and they're going to notice that. They're going to notice that. And you also provide them those opportunities in those discussion forums, for example, giving them, providing them some type of meaningful structure to support one another and invest in one another, which is another topic that can be covered at another point. Okay, anybody else want to chime in?
One thing that you were talking about in terms of like busy work, one thing I found that helps is if you explain to students why you're doing it. Like, why am I assigning this? What is the purpose? Like for the discussion boards, yes, they think sometimes writing a summary every week is a lot, but I explain to them it's developing studying skills. You're helping each other. You're developing a better understanding. And once they understand the why, they buy into it much more easily instead of just saying, well, I don't have time for this. Well, okay, but this is going to help me on the test potentially. And even if that's not particularly why I want them to be interested in it, at least they are interested in it because they're seeing the underlying reasons, which is part of that self-reflection.
Yeah, that's very good, Veronica. And I'm not sure as we go through this whether that's an explicit part of this, but I believe that's very important. When you're transparent and they know there's a purpose. I'm a big believer. I would use the word purpose. Your purpose today, or the purpose of this activity, not necessarily your purpose or our purpose, but if I'm going to give them something to do, they need to know why they're doing it. Here's the purpose behind it. And of course, I try to tie in, part of the purpose is it has to be tied into who they are as a student and tied into their goals, right? When it comes to their motivation. So I think that's a very good sharing. Thank you very much, Veronica, for that. Let's turn our attention back to some of these other bullet points that we want to talk about. And I just got to look here. Yes, I'm good here. So modeling the process of setting personally appropriate goals that take into account both strengths and weaknesses. And if you look at, how, I took some out of this for efficiency, but when we talk about modeling, there's two different ways you can do this. You can provide yourself as a model, which I would do for my students, and present them different options for how they stay on task, for example. So I use Google Calendar, Google Task. Here's how I do it. You provide them that option or that idea, and then other ideas. But then, of course, their peers can be a resource, an amazing resource too. So providing them spaces in our courses where they can, maybe provide a series of prompts where they can share ideas with one another. Because there is no just one way for a student to check in with themselves and stay motivated and stay on task and to develop appropriate goals that they can achieve, right? So you can be that model, their peers can be that model, or you can find models from the outside. But providing different options for them, again, that's like anything we talk about in UDL is all about options so that everybody's accommodated. Moving on. So we want to support activities that encourage self-reflection and identification of personal goals. And I think that basically reiterates or aligns with everything that we just talked about and people entered into the chat. So I think this has been a great unpacking of this particular checkpoint when we think of promoting expectations and beliefs that optimize. And the word optimize, I don't know. I mean, enhance or instill motivation or inspire motivation. Okay. Moving on. The second part of this is we want to facilitate personal coping skills. Let me back up for a moment. I'm going to back up. So we just talked about promoting expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. And we're at 10:45. So I think we might be able to get through this self-regulation. But so we want to facilitate personal coping skills and strategies. So thinking of that word facilitate, I almost like to think in terms of being a catalyst for students and how students develop their own coping skills and strategies. So let's move on to that. Moving on. Here we go. So, and you'll see how closely this aligns with what we just got done talking about, which is reminders, models, checklists are some of the strategies that can assist learners in choosing and trying an adaptive strategy for managing and directing their emotional responses to the following things. External events. So strategies for coping with anxiety-producing social settings or for reducing task-irrelevant distractors. So, when we think of self-regulation, this is a big deal, right? There's external events that present stimuli that activate certain parts of our brain. One part we didn't talk about, another part of the brain, is the limbic system, right? And when we think of students who are, dealing with anxiety because of various traumas or different situations they're facing in life, here's where we're thinking of external events. They could have test anxiety. They could have, or it could be distractors within their environment. If they're at home in an online course, and if you're like me, I'm constantly getting up and down and up and down, and oh geez, I got to do this and that. And the other thing, good thing I'm in this windowless office so I can focus, which is kind of sad. But you know, if we can provide them some strategies or help them find their own strategies for coping with anxiety producing stimuli or distractors, that's what part of this is about. The other thing is internal things going on. And of course, these are related. So strategies for decreasing rumination on depressive or anxiety producing ideation. Now, we have to be careful here. We're not therapists, but we can provide strategies when it comes to like coping skills with academic stuff. Okay. Oops. So, you know, and I think that a lot of what this addresses is related to the previous section or checkpoint that we talked about. That was more of providing students spaces to check in with themselves and with you. And here now we're thinking of how can I provide students opportunities to develop coping skills with, like, for example, anxiety around tests or anxiety around being able to perform well in the course or classroom. And I'll give you an example. Everybody has a different capacity in their working knowledge. And I know for me as a student at every level of my academic experience, especially K-12, I found that I was always behind everybody else. And my ability to really comprehend like text. And that made me feel stupid. But the reality of it is I'm a very thoughtful reader and I want to think, and it takes me time. So while everybody else is moving ahead, I would feel anxiety about I'm falling behind. I'm not any good at this. And so, you know, this is back in the, you know, late 70s and early 80s. And of course, education was a lot different now. And now we know more about how the brain works, and that if we provide options for students with respect, giving students space and time and choices in what they're doing so that they can adapt what you're doing to, like, for example, their working knowledge capacity. You know, some people have amazing capacity in working knowledge, and some people, they need more time. Otherwise, we could present students with a situation where they're feeling super anxious about a task, right? That we're having them do online or in the classroom. Let's move on to, we're going to move on to, we have just enough time to fit in. I want to move on to develop self-assessment and reflection. Wait a minute. Let's move on to this. Let's complete this idea. That's fine, David, it's fine. So we want to provide different, we're back to helping students with coping skills and strategies. So we want to provide differentiated models, scaffolds, and feedback for managing frustration, seeking external emotional support. So, you know, what resources are available for students if they need to talk to somebody. Honestly, I don't know what we have here at KVCC. I know at the four-year colleges, they had counselors who could assist them. I'm imagining we have something to do with it now. So we'd have to be aware of that. Can anybody speak to that? You know?
This is Michelle. Hi.
Hi, Michelle.
Depending, you can send someone to the Office for Student Access here. We
Yeah.
we are counselors and social workers and advisors, whether a student has a identified disability or not. And we do have counselors over in the student services area as well for that, but just anytime send folks up if they're struggling. Yeah.
Gosh, I think that would be a good workshop for faculty if faculty could know comprehensively what options that they can direct their students to. So thanks, Michelle. Also, providing them opportunities to develop internal controls and coping skills, so far as how they deal with external stimuli or internal issues that could distract their learning in their class. And then appropriately handling subject-specific phobias. And I think this gets back to what Nicole talked about when she's teaching certain financial topics that we're aware of that, and then also their academic attitude. Like, I'm not good at math. I fit in that one there. I had such a poor self-concept of math by the time I got to college, because I had struggled so mightily that I had to do a lot of self-work on that. And there were some math instructors, not all of them, but there were some math instructors who really helped me with that. And then using real life situations or simulations to demonstrate coping skills. I think that's very helpful too, because again, that's providing a model. Okay. It is 10:54, and I want to pause for a moment. I know we didn't even complete this one, but I think we've accomplished a lot. And I'm wondering, before time runs out on us, are there any thoughts or questions that you have about what we've discussed so far? I will send out a survey because I kind of want to know what direction to move forward on all of this from a faculty point of view. But does anybody have any thoughts or questions about big questions that you have about what we've learned so far or have learned in this workshop? I'm just going to give some space to think about it. I have not been paying attention to the chat. It's been amazing. The connections people are making here. Okay. So just to give you a quick idea of what the final one was, and that's developing self-assessment and reflection. I'm just going to kind of pop through this really quick. One of the key factors in learners losing motivation is their inability to recognize their own progress, right? It's important that learners have multiple models and scaffolds of different self-assessment techniques so that they can identify and choose ones that are optimal. So the whole point is giving students spaces to kind of reflect and go, whoa, wait a minute. What have I done actually? So reconnecting with past content and learning and seeing the breadth of what they've learned so far. And ways that this can be accomplished: offer devices, aids, or charts to assist individuals in learning to collect, chart, and display data from their own behavior for the purpose of monitoring changes in those behaviors. So again, self-regulation. So it's actually like they're kind of looking for evidence of their own behavior and be able to connect to that and be aware of that. Use activities that include a means by which learners get feedback and have access to alternative scaffolds. And this include some level of peer reflection or peer review, peer feedback. Okay, so this ends this whole consideration of, and let me go back. Oh, here we go. This idea of providing options for self-regulation. And we've zipped through this. We really thought about, facilitating personal coping skills and strategies, and then promoting expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. Now, kind of to wrap things up from my standpoint as the facilitator of this workshop, I will be providing you this particular Google slide for you for your own personal use, so you can look at the other things. But clearly, if we want to continue on with engagement, or if I want to, we'll have to hit those other points at a later time. I hope that you've gotten some use out of this. I think that the best part of this particular workshop is the interchange that everybody had on the chat, and their ability to share with one another, because I'll be frank with you, so many faculty here are already doing things that relate to UDL, because, well, you're all amazing. So with that, those are my concluding thoughts. And that is really the end of the workshop, unless somebody else has something to add. I will also give you access to the recording of this, so that if you want to go back and listen to the conversation, you could. Okay. So if we're all good, let us say goodbye to one another. And I'll hang out here for a moment if anybody wants to talk. Oh, well, thank you. I thought that it went better than I thought it would.